Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're diving into a topic a lot of you have been asking about, transitioning to agroecology. We've got tons of research and some really cool real-world examples to unpack.
It's a pretty hot topic right now, and for good reason.
Yeah, more and more people seem to be realizing that our current food system is, well, not exactly sustainable.
Exactly, and they're looking for alternatives.
So we want to understand how farms can actually make this shift to agroecology, right? Like, what are the steps involved? What are the challenges? How do farmers even learn to do this?
Great questions. And the first thing to understand is that this transition to agroecology, it's not like flipping a switch. It's a whole system change.
Okay, so no quick fixes here.
Definitely not. It's about understanding that everything on a farm is interconnected, like a delicate web.
I see. So it's more about working with nature than trying to control it.
Right. And, our sources really emphasize that this transition, it's a journey, not an overnight thing.
That makes sense. You don't just wake up one morning and suddenly you've got a fully agroecological farm. Like that old saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Exactly. And just like building Rome, there are distinct stages to this transition.
Okay, so walk me through it. What are these stages?
Well, the Introduction to Agroecology handbook we've got, it breaks it down pretty well. First, there's this awareness phase.
Awareness. Like the farmer wakes up and thinks, hey, maybe there's a different way to do things.
Exactly. It might start with a nagging feeling that things aren't quite right, or maybe they're inspired by another farmer or an article they read.
Right. A little light bulb moment.
Yeah, something like that. Then comes the fun part, experimentation.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Tell me more.
This is when farmers start trying out different practices, dipping their toes into the agroecology pool. It could be anything from planting cover crops to reducing their use of chemical fertilizers to experimenting with integrating livestock.
So it's like a trial and error phase, seeing what works on their specific farm.
Exactly. And I think this experimentation phase is super interesting because it really taps into farmers' problem-solving abilities.
Right. Farmers are already dealing with so many variables, weather, pests, market fluctuations. They're basically professional problem solvers.
Exactly. And with agroecology, they get to take those skills to a whole new level, becoming like scientists on their own land.
I love that. Turning the farm into a living laboratory. But okay, let's say a farmer's experiments are successful. They're seeing the benefits of these agroecological practices. What's the next step?
That's when they move into the integration phase.
Integration, huh? So what does that look like in practice?
Well, they start scaling up those successful practices, incorporating them more fully into their farm system.
So it's about going from small-scale experiments to weaving those practices into the fabric of the whole farm.
You got it. It might involve redesigning crop rotations, introducing beneficial insects, or implementing water conservation measures.
So it's like going from playing a single instrument to conducting a whole orchestra.
Perfect analogy. You need to understand how each part contributes to the overall harmony of the farm.
But I imagine this integration phase also comes with its fair share of challenges. I mean, overhauling an entire farming system sounds pretty daunting.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where understanding the real-world hurdles is crucial.
Okay, so lay it on me. What are the biggest challenges farmers face when transitioning to agroecology?
Well, our sources point to three major ones: economic concerns, consumer preferences, and infrastructure limitations.
That makes sense. Let's start with the economic side. Farmers are running businesses after all. They need to make a living.
Right. And one of the biggest concerns we see is that yields can actually dip during those early stages of the transition.
That's understandable. It's hard to embrace a new approach if you're worried about losing income and putting food on the table.
Absolutely. So addressing these economic anxieties is key. And the good news is there are solutions starting to pop up.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
Well, our research highlights some inspiring examples of governments stepping in to provide financial support.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
We see this through subsidies, grants, even tax breaks specifically for farmers making this transition.
Oh, so kind of like a safety net to cushion the potential financial blow.
Exactly.
Okay, that's encouraging. But even with financial assistance, I imagine farmers might still be hesitant if they're not sure whether people will actually buy agroecologically produced food. Do consumers really care enough to make a difference?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question our research tackles head-on.
So what's the verdict? Are consumers on board with this whole agroecology thing?
It's a mixed bag. What's fascinating is that the market for sustainably produced food is definitely growing. People are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of their food choices and are willing to put their money where their values are.
Yeah, I've noticed that shift too. Every time I go to the grocery store, there's a new label. Organic, regenerative, fair trade. But is it translating into actual sales for agroecological farms?
It's moving in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Like what?
Well, there's often a knowledge gap between what those labels actually mean and the practices behind them. So consumer education is key.
Right, because a label can only tell you so much.
Exactly. We need to connect consumers to the story behind their food, the farmers who grew it, the environmental benefits, the health advantages.
And so it's about building that bridge between the farm and the fork.
Precisely. Empowering consumers to make informed choices that support a more sustainable food system.
I'm all for that. Okay, so we've got farmers experimenting, we've got some financial support systems emerging, and we've got a growing consumer base interested in sustainable options. But what about the infrastructure? Even if a farmer wants to go all in on agroecology, do they actually have the resources and support systems to make it work?
Ah, yes, infrastructure. That's a critical point.
Because even the best intentions can only take you so far, right?
Right. And the reality is that the existing infrastructure, the processing facilities, the distribution networks, the storage solutions, it's all geared towards conventional agriculture.
Right. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You've got these amazing agroecological products, but the system isn't designed to handle them.
That's a great analogy. But here's where it gets really interesting. Our research shows that farmers are starting to take matters into their own hands.
Oh, I love it when people get creative. Tell me more.
Well, we've got case studies from Latin America where farmer cooperatives have actually created their own infrastructure networks.
Wow, that's amazing. So they're like, forget the system, we'll build our own.
Pretty much. They're building processing plants, storage facilities, even direct-to-consumer distribution channels.
That's seriously impressive. Yeah. But it begs the question, how do farmers even learn how to do all this? I mean, agroecology seems like such a radical departure from conventional agriculture. Where do they get the knowledge and skills to make this shift?
That is a fantastic question, and it leads us to one of the most exciting aspects of this whole transition, on-farm experimentation and farmer-to-farmer learning.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Imagine this. Every farm becomes a living laboratory.
Whoa, I like that.
Farmers aren't just following a set of rules, they're constantly testing, observing, adapting,
Yeah.
Becoming experts in their own microclimates, their soil types, their specific crops and livestock.
So it's this constant cycle of trial and error, each farm becoming a unique case study.
Exactly. And the beauty of this is that it's knowledge born from actual experience, not theoretical stuff from a textbook. It's hands in the soil, boots on the ground knowledge.
Right. It's that real world wisdom that you can only gain from actually doing the work.
Yeah.
But they're not doing this in isolation, right? We've talked about how important farmer to farmer exchange is. It's like this underground network of sustainable farming secrets.
Huh. You're not wrong. Farmer networks and field days are super important.
Yeah, I can picture those field days now. Farmers walking the fields, sharing their tips and tricks, geeking out over cover crops and compost.
Exactly. These are spaces where they can come together, swap stories, learn from each other's successes and failures.
Makes sense. Who better to learn from than someone who's already been there, done that? But we can't forget about the role of science in all this, right?
Yeah, definitely not. Our sources talk about the growing collaboration between farmers and researchers.
Okay, so how does that partnership work in practice?
Well, farmers bring their practical experience, their intimate knowledge of the land, and researchers bring the rigor of scientific methodology, the data analysis, understanding the underlying ecological principles.
So it's like a two-way street, a true partnership.
Exactly. Farmers provide that real-world testing ground, and researchers help explain the why behind what works and what doesn't.
I like that. Everyone brings something to the table.
And this collaboration is leading to some cool breakthroughs. We're seeing this rise in participatory research programs.
Participatory research. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
In these programs, farmers are actively involved in shaping the research questions. They're helping design experiments, collecting data, and basically ensuring that the research is actually relevant to their needs.
That's awesome. It's like farmers are becoming co-researchers, not just subjects of the research.
Exactly. It's a truly collaborative approach to knowledge creation.
Speaking of knowledge creation, can we talk about Sikkim for a minute? Because this story completely blew my mind.
Sikkim? You mean that state in India that went fully organic?
Yeah, that's the one. It's like an entire state. How is that even possible?
It is remarkable, isn't it? And Sikkim's transition is often held up as a success story.
So how did they pull it off?
Well, they took a systematic approach, They phased out those chemical fertilizers and pesticides step by step. They implemented organic farming practices across the board, and they're seeing some really impressive results.
Like what? Give me the highlights.
Well, for starters, their biodiversity has skyrocketed. Yeah. They've seen a huge resurgence of beneficial insects, birds, and soil organisms. The soil health has improved dramatically, too.
So healthier soil, more biodiversity. That's amazing.
And perhaps even more importantly, there's been a significant boost to the income and overall well-being of the farmers.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. A win-win-win for the environment, the farmers, and the consumers.
Exactly. And what's so striking about Sikkim is that it wasn't just about changing farming techniques, it was about changing mindsets.
There's that theme again. Shifting perspectives.
Yep. The handbook we keep mentioning really hammers this point home. Agroecology isn't just about adopting new tools, it's about shifting our whole way of thinking about agriculture.
So it's about moving away from that industrial model of dominating nature.
Right. And embracing a more harmonious approach, a collaborative approach.
Seeing the farm as an ecosystem, understanding that everything's interconnected.
Exactly. It's recognizing that the farmer's role isn't just to produce food, but to nurture life in all its forms.
I love that. And it makes me think about the role of advisors in this whole process, because farmers don't have to do this alone, right?
Absolutely. They have a ton of support. Extension agents, researchers, NGOs, these folks play a vital role.
I kind of imagine them as the interpreters. They're helping translate all that complex scientific knowledge into practical, on-the-ground techniques.
That's a great way to put it. They're the bridge between the lab and the field.
Exactly.
They provide training, resources, ongoing support, and really help farmers navigate all the challenges and opportunities of this transition.
So it's really a collaborative effort, right? Farmers, advisors, researchers, consumers, everyone working together to make this shift towards a more sustainable way of farming.
Absolutely. The most successful transitions are the collaborative ones, the ones that involve communities, networks, shared knowledge.
It's inspiring to hear these stories, but it also makes you realize how much needs to change, It's not just about individual farms, it's about transforming the whole food system.
You're hitting on a key point there. And that brings us to food. How we produce it, how we consume it, how we value it. Agroecology really challenges us to rethink our entire relationship with food and agriculture.
Okay, so we're talking big picture stuff here.
Yeah.
But how does that actually play out in the real world? What does a sustainable agri-food system actually look like?
Well, one of the key elements highlighted in our sources is the emphasis on local food production and consumption. Remember those farmer cooperatives in Latin America building their own infrastructure?
Right. They were amazing.
They weren't just creating processing plants and distribution networks, they were fostering these vibrant local food systems.
Right. Cutting out the middleman, shortening those supply chains, and keeping things closer to home.
Exactly. Local food systems are often more resilient because they're less reliant on those global supply chains.
Makes sense. If something goes wrong halfway across the world, it's not going to disrupt your local food supply.
Exactly. And local food systems also support local economies. They help keep money circulating within communities.
Right. So it's not just about the food itself. It's about the whole web of relationships and economic activity that surrounds it.
Exactly. And, let's be honest, the food just tastes better when it's fresh and hasn't traveled halfway around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all about that farm-to-table life.
Yes.
But speaking of supporting local farmers, our sources also talk about the importance of ensuring fair compensation for them. And this isn't just about paying them a decent wage. It's about recognizing the true value they bring to the table.
It's absolutely crucial. For too long, farmers, especially small-scale farmers and those practicing sustainable methods, haven't been adequately compensated for their labor and for the value they bring to the ecosystem.
So we've taken them for granted, expecting them to produce healthy food at the lowest possible price without really acknowledging the true cost of their efforts.
You're absolutely right. The current system often prioritizes cheap food above all else. But agroecology pushes us to consider the true cost of food production, the environmental costs, the social costs, the ethical costs.
It's about recognizing that food is not just a commodity. It's the foundation of our health, our well-being, our connection to the natural world. And it deserves to be valued accordingly.
Exactly.
So how do we change that? How do we make sure farmers are getting a fair deal for the vital role they play?
Well, there are several promising approaches emerging. We've already talked about direct marketing, which gives farmers more control over their prices.
Right, cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. There are also movements like fair trade, which establish minimum prices and social standards to protect farmers from exploitation.
So those are more about ensuring a fair price for the products themselves. But what about those ecosystem services we talked about earlier? How do we factor those into the equation?
That's a great question. And it's a question that a lot of people are grappling with right now. One idea is to actually reward farmers for those ecosystem services.
Reward them. Like, how would that work?
Well, think about all the things farmers do that benefit everyone, not just the people buying their food, things like sequestering carbon in the soil.
Right, helping to combat climate change.
Exactly. Improving water quality by reducing runoff and pollution, providing habitat for pollinators, ensuring the health of our ecosystems, enhancing biodiversity by creating diverse and resilient landscapes. These are all valuable services that farmers provide often without receiving any direct compensation.
Wow, when you put it that way, it really changes your perspective. It's like they're doing all this extra work that benefits all of us, and they're not even getting paid for it.
Exact.
So the idea is to find ways to actually pay them for those services.
Exactly. It could be through government programs, market-based mechanisms, or even direct payments from consumers.
Interesting. It's
Yeah.
like recognizing that their work goes beyond just producing food. They're stewards of the land, essential contributors to a healthy ecosystem.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But let's be real. Making these kinds of changes requires more than just good intentions and warm, fuzzy feelings. We need policies that actually support agroecology, right?
You're absolutely right. Our sources dedicate a whole chapter to the role of governance and policy, and they make a strong case that effective policies are essential for creating an environment where agroecology can flourish.
Okay, so what kind of policies are we talking about? Give me some examples.
Well, for starters, we need to take a hard look at those agricultural subsidies.
The ones that often end up supporting industrial agriculture.
Exactly. Right now, a huge chunk of those subsidies go towards propping up practices that harm the environment and undermine the very things we're trying to promote with agroecology.
Yeah, it seems kind of counterproductive to be subsidizing the problem while trying to promote the solution.
Exactly. We need to redirect those subsidies towards practices that benefit both farmers and the environment. Practices like agroecology.
So it's about putting our money where our mouth is. Investing in the kind of agriculture we want to see in the future.
Exactly. We also need to invest in research and education specifically for agroecology.
Right. Because farmers need access to the latest information and techniques.
Absolutely.
Right.
We need to support the development of new knowledge systems and training programs that empower farmers to transition to these practices.
And it's not just about research and education, right?
Right.
We also need to make sure that agroecological products can actually compete in the marketplace.
You're absolutely right. We need regulations that level the playing field. That could involve things like labeling standards that clearly identify and differentiate these products, market access programs that connect farmers with consumers, and trade policies that promote fair trade and protect small-scale farmers.
So it's about creating a system that actually supports a more sustainable and equitable way of farming.
Exactly.
And are we seeing any progress on that front? Are there any governments out there that are actually getting this right?
There are some really encouraging signs. Our sources highlight the European Green Deal, which includes a strong focus on sustainable agriculture.
That's the EU's big plan to become climate neutral by 2050. Right.
Exactly. And there are some really interesting agroecology laws in Latin America that are promoting these practices on a national level.
So there's some real momentum building around the world. It's inspiring to see governments taking these issues seriously and enacting policies that support a more sustainable future for food and agriculture.
It is exciting, and it's not just happening at the top-down level. We're also seeing a surge in grassroots movements and community-led initiatives that are pushing for change from the bottom up.
Which brings us back to that theme of collaboration. It seems like agroecology really thrives on partnerships and networks.
Absolutely. It's not something any one group can achieve on their own. We need everyone working together: farmers, researchers, policymakers, consumers, communities.
Yeah, it takes a village to transform a food system. And our sources highlight some great examples of this collaboration in action, like those participatory research programs where farmers are actively involved in shaping the research agenda.
Right, making sure that the knowledge being generated is actually relevant to their needs.
And those farmer field schools where they're learning from each other, sharing best practices and traditional knowledge.
Exactly. Those are powerful examples of how agroecology is built on shared experience and collective wisdom.
And of course, we can't forget those amazing Latin American farmer cooperatives that are building their own infrastructure and showing the world that a different way of doing things is possible.
Exactly. They're a testament to the power of collective action and the transformative potential of agroecology.
Speaking of transformative potential, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Where do you see agroecology going in the future? What's next for this movement?
That's the million-dollar question. But if I had to paint a picture of the future, I'd say the key lies in scaling up these successes. We have all these inspiring examples of agroecology working on the ground, from individual farms to entire regions. Now we need to figure out how to take these practices to the next level.
So how do we go from these pockets of innovation to a widespread transformation of the food system?
It's going to require a multi-pronged approach. We need continued investment in research and education, strong policy support that incentivizes sustainable practices, a growing consumer demand that shifts market forces. But ultimately, the future of agroecology rests on the shoulders of the farmers.
It all comes back to the farmers, doesn't it?
It always does. They're the real heroes of this story, the innovators, the stewards, the ones who are quite literally feeding the world.
And agroecology really puts them at the center, right? It's about empowering them, giving them the tools and knowledge to create a more sustainable future.
Exactly. It recognizes that they're not just producing food, they're nurturing ecosystems, building resilience, safeguarding biodiversity.
And it acknowledges the deep wisdom they hold, that intimate connection to the land that centuries of farmers have cultivated.
It's a wisdom that's often been overlooked or undervalued in our modern industrial food system.
Right. It's like we prioritized efficiency and productivity above all else, forgetting that there's more to farming than just churning out commodities.
And agroecology is helping us rediscover that deeper connection to the land and to the people who feed us.
It's about recognizing that farmers are more than just producers. They're stewards, they're caretakers, they're essential partners in building a healthier and more sustainable world.
Beautifully said. And it reminds me of a quote from one of our sources. It really captures the essence of this shift in perspective.
Right.
It goes something like, the farmer's role in a sustainable agricultural landscape, it's not just about producing food, it's about nurturing life.
I love that. It's about recognizing that food is more than just fuel. It's about nourishment, connection, community.
Yeah.
It's about life itself.
Exactly. And speaking of nurturing life, you mentioned the Rodale Institute earlier. They're doing some fascinating research on regenerative organic agriculture, showing that it's actually possible to grow food in a way that heals the planet.
Yeah, that research is really eye-opening. It's like they're not just growing food, they're regenerating entire ecosystems.
They are, and they've been doing it for decades, patiently collecting data and demonstrating that these methods can rebuild soil health, sequester carbon, increase biodiversity.
Now, hold on a second. You can't just casually drop regenerative organic agriculture into the conversation without explaining what it is. It sounds intriguing, but I need more details. What exactly is it, and how is it different from, regular organic farming?
You're absolutely right. My apologies for jumping ahead. Regenerative organic agriculture, it basically takes the principles of organic farming, avoiding synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, and kicks things up a notch.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So it's like organic 2.0.
You could say that. It's about going beyond just avoiding harm and actually focusing on regenerating the soil, building healthy ecosystems, and mimicking nature's processes.
So give me some examples. What kind of practices are we talking about?
Think cover cropping, composting, no-till farming. These are all practices that help build soil fertility, increase water retention, and create habitat for beneficial insects and microorganisms.
So it's like creating this thriving underground ecosystem that supports healthy plant growth above ground.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that the Rodale Institute's research is showing that these practices can actually lead to higher yields in the long run.
Really? So it's not just good for the planet, it's good for the farmer's bottom line too.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. And that's what's so exciting about agroecology. It's a holistic approach that acknowledges the interconnectedness of everything.
It's like that saying, everything's connected. It turns out it's actually true.
It really is. And agroecology reminds us that we're not separate from nature, we're a part of it. And the way we grow our food has a ripple effect on the entire ecosystem.
Right. It's about shifting from that mindset of domination and control to one of cooperation and harmony.
Exactly. It's about working with nature, not against it.
And it's about empowering farmers to be the stewards of the land that they've always been. It's a pretty radical idea when you think about it. Challenging the status quo, redefining our relationship with food, empowering farmers to be leaders in this movement towards a more sustainable world.
It is radical. But it's an idea whose time has come. And if Sikkim has taught us anything, it's that large-scale transformation is possible. If an entire state in India can make the shift to organic farming, imagine what's possible in other parts of the world.
That's what I keep coming back to. That Sikkim story is so inspiring. It's like a beacon of hope. It shows us that a different path is possible.
It does, and it makes me wonder, what could it look like if consumers in other parts of the world were as committed to supporting agroecology as the people of Sikkim? What if we all made a conscious effort to support our local farmers to choose agroecologically produced food whenever possible?
I think that's a powerful question to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
It's a call to action. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable and just food system.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much ground, explored so many fascinating ideas, and really gotten to the heart of what agroecology is all about.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you about this. I always learn so much from these conversations.
Me too. And as always, we've just scratched the surface. We have a ton of resources in our show notes, including links to all those handbooks, research articles, and organizations we mentioned. So if you're feeling inspired to learn more, definitely check those out.
And if you're feeling really inspired, maybe you'll even start your own agroecological journey. Whether it's growing some herbs on your windowsill, volunteering at a local farm, or just making more conscious choices at the grocery store, every little bit helps.
That's right. We can all be part of this movement towards a more sustainable and delicious future for food.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.